Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Evil. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, I really love the episode title being The Demon of Money, and that this is basically about, I really like this overarching storyline about, well, not overarching, but just like the main storyline of this episode being about people getting rich. And then it started with a guy getting followed by a demon. And it's just like, right. And it does that like creepy thing of like, as it's walking, kind of does that like jittery thing. And it looks so like out of focus. And it was just like, once again, Ben has to try and rationalize it, and Kristen tried to rationalize it, being like, oh, maybe he has that phobia of being like, success and getting suddenly rich, and obviously, there's some psychological thing of like, oh, you creating stress for yourself because you suddenly got rich. Ben's thinking like someone's messing with the guy, but it's like, yeah, ever since he got this money, he's been like, dealing with that. Then they trace it back to when he was working at a bank, the person that was a customer that gave him that information about the stock. She turns out she gave away everything, and she's like, the moment I did, like the demons, I haven't seen hide nor hair of it. And so it's almost like, oh, she's like, I almost basically took a vow of poverty. And you're like, huh. I was like, interesting. And then it turns out her uncle did the same thing. Sadly, her uncle, because it's basically not just all the money you got, but all the money, including everything you've ever spent anything on. So that included her house and anything else like that. Her uncle, unfortunately, though, got LASIK eye surgery or something, and like a nose job and veneers. So the moment he pulled that off, I was like, yo, he looking like Red Skull. I was like, oh my god, that's brutal as hell, dude. And it's like, and knowing he did it to himself too. So it's like he had to kind of give everything back. Because it's all traces back to a stock DF. And the thing is, sadly, Ben's sister, Karima, ended up, the moment that happened, you're like, well. And Ben's just kind of like, right, he believes it's all BS. But Karima's like, yeah, I saw it. Like, the shadow always stayed like a couple feet away from me. So Ben decided to, like, no, I'm like, why would you, like, regardless of it all, why would you still do, like, I get it because his rational brain justifies stuff, but I'm like, the guy they started this case with ended up dying because for him it's like, I can't take that money back. Because he's like, I spent that money not only on this boat, I got hair plugs, my mom got a hip replacement, what am I supposed to do, cut that out of her? So he didn't have much choice, so the creature eventually killed him, but now it looks like a suicide, and they're saying that, oh, maybe he made it look like an assault or whatever, because that way when he dies, any of that money or whatever insurance stuff will eventually go to his family, so they're like, oh, the attack was staged and stuff, but it's like, okay, so it does eventually kill you. The example Ben uses is The Ring. In my head, I was like, oh, like It Follows, but I guess it's like Ring would be like the original OG. Like that's it. You have to kind of pass the curse along, but it's very like It Follows, especially considering it's a thing and it is following you specifically like that. So if you're not familiar with It Follows, I've never seen the movie, but I know what the premise of it is. I mean, one thing, the whole movie's supposed to be like a giant metaphor for like, or I don't know if it was intentionally made that way, or at least people took it from it. It was like the whole movie's like a horror metaphor for like sexually transmitted disease, but it's like you have to sleep with someone to pass it on to them, but it's this thing that slowly followed you, it never stopped. That's the premise behind the movie. I've never seen it, but I've always heard people talk about it and heard nothing but good things about it. I'm not the horror guy, so It Follows immediately kind of stuck in my mind. So but Ben had his experience with it. And I thought it was interesting because Ben confronted it at first. He walked forward and it took a step back, and he was kind of like, yeah. And he kept stepping forward, but then it starts stepping forward too, and it started chasing after him. And he thought like, okay, I'm crazy. Then he sees it later on. He tries to follow it. It disappears around a corner. Kristen's like, don't worry, give it to me. I'm like, why would you do? Because everyone says like, what are you going to do? Like, why would you do that? I'm like, what are you going to do? Pass it to David now? I'm like, she's like, I got an idea. I'm like, what idea do you have? Lo and behold, her idea is to give it to the guy that she punched down in the supermarket. I was like, I love it, Kristen. That's super shitty and that's super petty because you know what this means. It's super fucked up that you're doing this, but I'm like, dude, I love it. I love that energy. Let's keep that energy. I love it. I'm like, that is the shittiest thing to do. Like, yeah, he's some douchebag, but does he deserve to be haunted by a demon that will eventually kill him, but she's not worried about it? It's like, eventually the dickhead will figure out about it, and then he'll come to me, and I'm like, okay, I mean, would Kristen tell him the truth though? Like, oh, you need to, because once again they ended up finding out it's the stock specifically. Because he pieced it together like, right. The other people, they kept being haunted even after they gave everything away. It wasn't until they passed the stock on. So the stock itself is the kind of in the It Follows comparison. Buying the stock is like banging the person that's infected with the curse. So it's like, yeah, now it passes on to the person. And luckily, Kristen didn't have to worry about the ramifications. Because I thought she was like, oh, being haunted by a demon. It's like, well, she's already been down that route because of the George thing. So I was like, oh, maybe that's how she's going to handle it. Never crossed my mind she'd be kind of a dick and pass it on to that guy. But it's like, yeah, he's kind of a douchebag. Especially because her girls are watching him on... was it VidTalk or whatever, that video app that they introduced this season? Yeah, apparently he like harasses other people too. He's just a complete another asshole. So, and I guess it's Kristen's way to kind of pay him back for her having to apologize to him. So now it's like, yeah, it's kind of he's going to get his comeuppance. So, but I mean, sadly that comeuppance, no matter how much of a dick he is, he doesn't deserve to die because the thing will eventually kill him or drive him insane to the point that he ends up giving everything away because you're telling him like, oh, that's how you do it. And then after he's given everything away, you like, actually have to convince someone else to buy the stock. I wonder, could you double back? Once again, we don't know the full rules of this, so could he be like, oh, no one who's aware of the DF stock will ever do that. But even if you did, I wonder if you double back, if someone willingly was like, okay, I'll buy the stock again, would it be, because it's specifically like, you have to pass the tip on. I don't know if, they gave all their money away and give it up, but it's like, I wonder, could you keep all the money? Like, his sister made like 1,000, like Ben's sister and Kareem made like $1,000. Does she get to keep the $1,000 now that she passed it on to Ben, so she doesn't have to give the money back? Or does you have to do, because it seemed like that's the main thing. So once again, we don't get the full rules of it, but like I said, I'd be interested to know if you could double back on it. Obviously, no one would be crazy enough to double back on it, because everyone who has experience is like, fuck no, I'm not about to be haunted by a demon, so that's a no-go on that front, right? So I just thought that was kind of an interesting premise for this episode. I wasn't expecting that when it was like, oh, like the demon of money. I didn't know. I feel like you could almost, exchange that with like the demon. But I guess it's like more so about like, because it's you can't really, if you say stock, you kind of make that clear from the beginning that it's about the stock. You want to make it seem like it's about the money, which it kind of is, but not really. So either way, just thought that was interesting. I also love that they were pointed in this direction because Grace, who's basically the church is hounding her for information, is just like, all right, can you help us? And she's just like, they're like, what does this belong to? She's like, I don't know. Leave me alone. Let me get a break, And she can't even go back to check on the like kids that she was looking after before, like, yeah, that was a season 1 storyline when we first got introduced to Grace. The fact is, she wanted to go back to like looking after the kids and stuff, but sadly she finds out later on that the place got demolished. So she kind of shut down and didn't want to talk to anybody. But luckily, David was like, well, I know a friend who's got some kids, and so got Grace to hang around them. And then she was at the party. Well, first and foremost, like her hanging around the kids, and they're like, oh, so like when does our dad come back? You're supposed to see the future and stuff like that. But she talks to Laura, it's like, next Thursday. What? I was like, whoa, so Andy's going to be okay. Yeah, Andy. I was like, wow. I'm like, how's that going to play out, though? For Andy to come back home, that means, like, everything's going to work out and play out. But I'm like, how is that going to work? Well, with the way things have kind of played out, it's not too out there. But what I thought was interesting was Cheryl introduced herself. I'm like, oh, you're going to see something about Cheryl. And then she was like, I forgive you. And she's like, what? About what you do tomorrow night? She's like, what? I'm confused. I was like, I was like, the moment she's like, I forgive you, I was like, oh, Cheryl's going to kill her, isn't she? Because she's a prophetess, so she knows too much. Also, once again, I love that she has to roll deep with like people from the church and stuff like that. I love that because because the drawings come to her like just suddenly, so they always have to be nearby. Well, for one, to protect her, so they're like her own personal guard, but two, also so that she can, in case she like, does some text or something like that, draws something that they can immediately get it, so. But Kristen was like, right, you were right about Laura's heart getting better. And said, right, what about Lexus? Alexis is good because as long as you protect her, there are people who want her to do bad, and then she gets interrupted, and Kristen doesn't realize what it is, and even Gina, I said Gina, geez. Grace doesn't know what it is either, but it's related to Andy. Cheryl sees that, takes a picture, and lets Leland know. And Leland immediately knows about Grace and is like, oh, we need to take care of that. So you would think, I guess, like, they need Andy alive for whatever purposes for now. Because I thought the impression was like, oh, you need to kill him. Like, oh, you need to kill Andy. Oh, he goes to kill Grace, but maybe he was going to kill her first and then eventually get whatever he needs from Andy. Because they need to keep up this front, so they don't want to take the chance that, well, if we kill Andy too soon, there might be some stuff that Cheryl might not be able to fill in. So he's still necessary. So let's kill Grace first. Do whatever we need to. Because, I mean, the sad thing is, Kristen even brought it up earlier in the episode when she was talking to Kurt about everything that went down last episode with Valerie and her husband. That must be a next season storyline, because I doubt they're going to do that in the next episode, but I could definitely see that. And especially for Kristen, she feels this weird, and she feels weird about it, because it's like, right, the thought of someone else having her baby. I mean, I wonder if there's some level of her that's thinking about the genetics of it all just because of the Lexus of it all and knowing what her genetics have been. Like, maybe there's a part of her that's worried about that, but also it's just like, she's like, there's some part of her that's relieved about some other woman not having her baby and she feels bad about it. I mean, the thing is, humans, we generally have dark thoughts. The difference between us and just like people who are sociopaths or psychopaths, like they don't have that part of their brain, like their id, to tell them it's wrong not to do it. So it's like, she's like, yeah, I had thoughts. And I even thought it was interesting where, it's like, oh, like sometimes you want to, he referenced something and he's like, yeah, and you want to kill your neighbor, and your neighbor you might want to kill. And he stops because it's like, yeah, not the best example to use with Kristen, because she went in and like, bashed a dude in with her climbing axe. So it's kind of not the best example to use. So I think it's funny, and I think it speaks volume that he was like, oh, a neighbor that you kill, and stopped himself and then moved on, So I'm surprised Kristen also didn't have it, because he's one of the few people that knows what she actually did to LaRoche. So was it LaRue or LaRoche? Either way. And she also caught Kurt when he's like writing his story, and he's like, oh, please read it. I need some perspective on it. Which when she finally does read it, I'm like, it's like gibberish and symbols and stuff. I'm like, okay, but I'm sure you could probably translate that. And you get to later parts in the book and you're like, oh, it's literally just backwards. And I guess Kristen was just like, I'm not going to bother reading that. And then one of her kids reads it, and apparently they all loved it. And I love later on, what was that line from Kurt? Man, fuck you, Satan. Because he just gave up, because he was just like, I guess he was just tired of it all. And maybe he's just like, I'm not going to sell my soul to you anymore. I'm done with this. Because maybe he was just like, right, he ain't got any feedback from Kristen about anything. And he's just like, oh, the book sucks. I suck. There's no point in continuing. Because he wanted to know what she thought of the book, wanted to know whether or not it was worth it continuing. And then the girls all loved the book. It was about, 4 girls, like, killing their mom, and you're like, okay, because the whole thing was about a mom and her 4 daughters living, you're like, right, there's direct parallels to Kristen and her daughters. And then it's like, yeah, apparently, like, body parts. And then Laura gave her ideas. They're like, oh, yeah, he gave him ideas. They're like, yeah, he's like, wait, he's like, you enjoyed it? You really did? It's like, yeah. They were like, yeah, we, like, oh my God, wait, you're Dr. Kurt? Yeah, we love your book. You need to give us the next chapter. He's like, well, I was going to end it ambiguously. They're like, she's like, fuck no, don't do that. It needs to be a clear ending, and it needs to be clever. I'm curious how most people feel about ambiguous endings. Like, some people, it's just like, oh, that's a cop-out. It's like, depending on how ambiguous it is, and I guess it all depends on the movie. Some movies, it's like, okay, I can live, some movies and TV shows, you can live with ambiguity. Other things is like, no, clear-cut answer, please. I'm more of probably a clear-cut answer person. You don't need to answer everything, but I need probably a more clear-cut ending, and then you can go from there being like, all right, years down the line, this is what the story could be, yada, so on and so forth. But she wants a clear-cut ending, which I'm like, it's probably not a good thing, because whatever ending he does fully come up with, you're like, it's going to somehow get reflected into Kristen's home life, isn't it? We'll see. But he's just like, oh, he's like, oh, I'm good. And he gets back to Titan, and he's like, oh, my soul, fill me up and everything. And I'm just like, oh, sweet Kurt. If only Sister Andrea could see how you've fallen. It's like, man, I wouldn't have expected this storyline from Kurt, and especially to continue being this Because it's one of those storylines that's only in the episode like a little bit. It's not like the main focus of the episode. It's only like sprinkled in like a couple minutes here and there throughout the episode. So I'm curious to see what the end result of that's going to be. And obviously, like, right, the whole thing is like, well, getting his soul and everything, and kind of, but I'm sure it's also like his work will eventually, like, they're hoping that, you know, it's kind of a work of evil that will kind of corrupt people potentially. I think it's kind of like the main thing that they're kind of going with that. I'm really interested to see where that storyline goes. I even love later on, what was it, the first guy in the case wanted Kristen was going to recommend a therapist, and she pulled out Kurt's card, and she was like, I'm going to find you someone else, because this was like, I think that was after she had already met with Kurt early in the episode. Yeah, because all that was at the beginning of the episode. So she was kind of like, yeah, Kurt's not in the best state of mind, especially when she read the book later on. She's like, Jesus, Kurt. Well, just not even read it, just kind of looked at the state of it. So she's kind of like, especially Kurt being like, oh, you should come back to weekly therapy. Now she's almost like, maybe you should be going to therapy. Kurt, like, something fucked up is going on there. So I think that's kind of interesting. And then finally, there's the whole situation with Grace. I was immediately thinking like, oh my god, it's going to be Cheryl. Of course Cheryl's going to be there. And it turned out not to be her. It was Leland. Leland slit the throat of a priest, and he was just laughing and just enjoying it. And Grace kind of accepted. She knew what was coming. But then the Monsignor stepped in. I was like, yo! I was like, oh god. I was like, is she still going to die as a result of this? And it's like, no, the Monsignor dies. Like, either she didn't see it, either like something changed in that moment. Like, maybe even her sight isn't 100%. Maybe just something in general changed. Like, the fact is he came to save her, and he dies in the process. Like, it was almost like she had accepted it. Maybe she had seen things up to a certain point and assumed, like, maybe she saw, like, hit Leland with a blade and her praying, and then, like, she saw blood everywhere, and she just assumed it was her, and maybe the full vision didn't come to her. Like, she only kind of gets pieces of things sometimes, too. So part of me wonders, could it be that she didn't see the Monsignor's death? She just saw part of it and assumed it was her death, but maybe the Monsignor was always going to die. And that's a heartbreaking thing. He's like, yo, hold my hand. Because he's the only one that's kind of died. Like, once again, I'm blanking on the actor's name now, but it's Peter. He's the actor, because they had a tribute to him at the end of the first episode of the season, because he died in between season 2 and 3. But he was the one that they mainly got stuff from. Like, I don't know if they ever said, like, whether or not he, like, died on screen or not. I think they just kind of ignored that, and the Monsignor kind of took back presence in this. But I think he's the first, because, like, the other priest that they were working with back in, season 1 or season 2, like, ended up getting transferred, and they ran into him again, like, during exorcism stuff. But, yeah, he's, like, the first one that's kind of died, which is heartbreaking, and especially him being like, tell Father, Ignatius, I love, and he dies. But we got that was the episode early on in season 1 that they went like, oh, it's like he transferred to a different church, because him and the Monsignor, there was something there, but they kind of, once again, I'm sure it's complicated, because once again, it's the whole thing of not only are you supposed to be celibate as priest, but also probably, the church, Catholicism, Christianity, like, not in some cases, not all cases, but I feel like it's probably most cases, but in most cases, but not all cases, Christianity and Catholicism don't, once again, they're not the only ones. There's a few religions I think don't smile too much upon. I do, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Jehovah's Witnesses aren't too keen on homosexuality, sadly, either. So you had to, like, bury that deep inside. Like, that's why you're like, hey, get him transferred just so you wouldn't be around each other, because of, like, resurfacing old feelings. Because he was on his deathbed, but then it was like, oh, I'm not dead, I'm alive. And now it's like, right, and that's the sad thing of it, like, right, he gets to live, the Monsignor dies, and, it's like, right, tell him I love, so, I was like, I wasn't expecting that. I would have never thought that, granted, Leland did walk away from it unscathed, like, the Monsignor must have gotten a good blow with that knife or something, because, like, his, like, side was cutting, like, you bastard. Because she was even praying, she's like, oh, please forgive him. So it's like, I guess it's that thing of, like, even praying for your enemies type of thing. I'm too vindictive and vengeful to be like, nah, fuck that. Fuck Leland. I'm like, oh, pray for him. It's like, no, fuck Leland. He's a piece of shit. Like, that's just me. just I'm not the good Christian or good Catholic in that regard. So either way, it's going to definitely be interesting to see where the next episode takes us. The fact is, Grace, they're probably going to like take Grace and like put her in hiding. Like they probably can't leave her out and about anymore. It's like, right, we got to put her somewhere safe. No one can find her, because I guess they wanted to give her space. Because like for one, it's her room. She did have a guard at the very least, but not because it's like, right, it's like the church. It was like probably like one of the rooms. So it's like, why would you wouldn't think that someone would come directly attack her at the church or anything like that, but. I don't think she was rolling deep like she normally is. It's only like probably like one or two people that watch her, because it's like, right, she's in a room, like we don't need to invade her privacy. But yeah, it's because now he sets up the stage of like, well, who are they going to start taking orders from like going forward? We already know the show's coming back for a 4th season, so part of me is like, LeConte, Victor, like, is it Victor or Vincent? Like he might be the one that they I get the feeling like he might be filling that void a little bit while still doing some of like the more shadier side of things with the with his friends of the church shit, so we'll see where all of this ends up taking us going forward next episode. Hopefully Andy gets rescued, but like I said, like how do you get to like the point where you know where Andy is? I mean, Grace is still alive, so she still could point you in the right direction, and she could also be like, oh, it was Leland, and now like Leland's in deep shit because it's like, well, you killed him on Senior, and there's a witness left behind to be like, yo, it was you. So I wonder if that's going to have any effect on Kurt in his book, because it's like, oh, I was working with. I mean, he's already known about Leland and everything, and he's still like work with Leland with this whole Muse thing. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. Especially because I'm like, I cannot wait for Kristen to find out about her mom's involvement in all of this. Maybe she still won't, but we'll see. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.